Having asked for challenge run ideas in my last couple videos, the weapon that came up the most, alongside chaos weapons, was the Lifehunt Scythe. I know the Backlogs did a video with it a while back, but he used the Great Scythe for the first half of the run, and he didn't have that high of a bleed resistance. I was also going to do this run with minimal bleed resistance, but that ended up being really boring because I would just attack the boss, dodge for 10 seconds, then attack the boss again. Instead, I'm going to try to maximize my bleed resistance because, for one, it makes the run more interesting and informative, but it's also really funny to see a massive bleed resistance bar. We do need to get to Orlando and kill Priscilla for the weapon, and we need a plus 10 halberd class weapon to ascend into it, but that won't be too difficult. I'm starting as the hunter because it gives me enough dexterity to wield the Lifehunt Scythe from the very beginning. I did want to do the thing where you just quit out after killing the asylum demon so it stays alive so I could come back and kill it with the scythe, but I couldn't figure out exactly how to do it, and it's also literally just the asylum demon, so whatever. The asylum is done just as normal, and we can start actually trying to get our weapon. The first thing I want to do is grab the large ember, since we need a plus 10 halberd as soon as possible. Getting into the depths themselves is pretty easy. You just need to roll off the ladder in the berg onto the wall after climbing it from the bottom, then drop onto the aqueduct tunnel, drop onto the thin wall, and then down into the depths. Getting back and bounce from here is also pretty straightforward as long as you know what you're doing. From where the giant rats and the channeler are, you can clip back and bounce and run straight back to where the bonfire is, then up to where the... maybe I should do that later, actually. The first thing I want to do is grab the halberd that we'll be upgrading and using to get the scythe. We can just sprint through Darkroot and back up around Andre, then run around the parish church and grab the halberd. After a bit of grinding, I can easily get it up to plus 5. I decided on a whim to try the damage and moveset on the Titanite demon to learn how to use the weapon because I use it so rarely, but the demon ended up dropping the Titanite catchpole, which is a surprisingly rare drop, for what it is, and how rare Titanite demons themselves are. I never used the catchpole before, so I decided to do a bit of Twinkling Titanite and use it until I get to Orlando. Of course, we still need to get the halberd up to plus 10, this will just make doing that, and getting our main weapon, much easier. I also didn't feel like killing a bunch of really annoying Titanite demons, primarily the ones in the tar pit and Sens, so I just duped the demon Titanite as well while I was here. Before anything else, I want to get the doll. I forget the doll way too often for how much I play this game, and I even forgot it in a previous attempt at this playthrough. I also thought you could turn the crystal halberd into a plus 10 standard halberd, but that's not the case, so I just started a new character. Anyway, the asylum isn't a threat, and the Black Knight in front of the doll can be killed extremely easily with this weapon. Now is also a good time to return to the depths, since we can actually do a good amount of damage to anything down there. This time I missed a jump, but it ended up being beneficial because I could open a door from out of bounds and clip back inbounds. It was at the top of the shortcut next to the giant rat, completely on accident. Anyway, working my way up to the ember is pretty easy with a max level weapon. Now that we have everything we need to make the weapon, it's time to go through the process of actually making it. First and foremost, glitch time. Send skip is a skip I've done quite a bit through my various challenge runs. It's pretty easy once you know how, but it looks pretty crazy the first time. You simply use the riposte animation to clip slightly out of bounds and touch the deathcam trigger, where the camera goes above the player, without actually dying. In this state, our controls are really messed up, but objects don't load, so with a bit of effort we can make our way into Sen's fortress without ringing any bells. I ran up and grabbed the first couple large Titanite shards because I forgot the ones in Blighttown, then got the halberd to plus 7 so I didn't have to worry about using the large ember later. Then I did Sen skip again and actually went through the level. Sens takes a solid 3 minutes when you know what you're doing, and it's primarily comprised of sprinting, so unless you're shocked that a challenge runner can make it through a mandatory level without much trouble, there's not much to mention here other than making sure I had enough large Titanite from the Crestfallen Merchant. The Iron Golem did a lot of standing in the fire because I didn't want to take out the giant, but with a max level weapon we do plenty of damage. It barely stumbles and never falls during this fight because the length of the weapon makes it almost impossible to hit the ankles exclusively, but that genuinely doesn't make it any harder, just a little longer. Alright, now that we're in Orlando, we gotta get to the Painted World so we can take out Priscilla and steal our weapon. Honestly, Orlando is a lot like Sens. It's hard your first time, but when you know what you're doing, it lasts a few minutes at most, especially the rafters and buttresses. Luckily, we don't actually need to cross the buttresses just yet, so I just sprint across the rafters, bring the main elevator down twice, rest in the Darkmoon Tomb, and sprint into the painting. Somehow, a gargoyle stayed on the elevator while bringing it down, but it's also just a gargoyle, so luckily it doesn't pose any trouble. I learned how to do the Painted World skip without killing the dragon after this run, but for now I'm killing it like normal and using a jump attack to get past the butt. Priscilla will kill me in one shot if she happens to hit me here, but luckily I'm good at the video game sometimes, so I kill her first try, take her soul, and get through the rest of Orlando. I was able to get through it relatively unscathed on my first try, and we can get our main weapon of the run, the Lifehunt Scythe. The main draw of the Lifehunt Scythe is that it does a lot of bleed damage. Most weapons that cause bleed buildup have a 300 bleed modifier. The Lifehunt Scythe, along with Ceaseless Dagger, have 500, which means it has more buildup and does more damage when it actually procs. Against normal enemies that are susceptible to bleed, it does 50% of their health, as opposed to the usual 30%, but that number is a little different for bosses. The actual craziness of this will be more obvious when we fight the Stray Demon. The only problem with having this insane bleed buildup is that the Scythe also makes you bleed. I left my bleed resistance really low initially, so you can see how cautious I had to be with ONS, but once I actually buff my bleed resistance some, you'll see how this weapon should actually perform. Either way, we do a lot of damage regardless of the lack of aggression on my part, so the comedy duo goes down without much trouble. There are a couple things you can do to increase your bleed resistance, but the most important by far is dependent on the gear you're wearing. The blood shield does increase bleed resistance by quite a bit, and I already had it from the Painted World, but it's not nearly as good as a couple of other items you can get. Both of them are behind the gargoyles though, so that's our next goal. I mean, technically one of them doesn't require fighting the gargoyles, and we could already have it if I had thought of it earlier, but that's not important right now. With the blood shield, I barely have to worry about any bleed buildup, so I run in, grab the first item, kill the gargoyles, ring the bell, then buy the second. The two items are the Gargoyle Tail Axe, which is the best bleed resistance item you can possibly have in your hand, and the Bloodbite Ring, which is the single most bleed resistance you can get from any single item. As soon as I put them on, you can see how much bigger my bleed bar gets. The biggest problem with the Scythe is that bleed buildup is given every time you hit an enemy, including their corpse before they ragdoll, so doing a plunging attack on a bunch of hollows instantly procced bleed, and you can see how much damage it does when it actually fills up. I put on the Fab Ring here because I didn't want to take the time to grab anything else right now. I also boosted my dexterity to 40 for the highest scaling it's worth getting, and level up my endurance a bit to get some more bleed resistance. Since I already killed the gargoyles, I figured it would be a good time to go fight Quelaag. Now that I don't even need to think about my bleed buildup, I can easily take out Quelaag in less than 30 seconds. The damage on this Scythe is pretty crazy, and the downside is very easy to ignore with just a couple pieces of gear, let alone once we increase the resistance more with some decent armor and endurance. The gold hem set has decent bleed resistance, but it's far from the best in the game. Unfortunately, 2 pieces of armor with the highest bleed resistance require a couple quests that I didn't do, namely the Sage Robe from Logan and the Bloodstained Skirt from letting Lautrec kill Anastasia. It's very easy to get the Gargoyle Helm and Smo's Gauntlets though, so I'll definitely be grabbing those. I was almost able to kill Ceaseless before he fell. I was only one hit away, just to give a bit more context to the damage that this Scythe does. The giant bleed resistance bar is also really funny, but it doesn't get any longer visually, regardless of how much more bleed resistance we actually get. That doesn't mean I'm not going to try and maximize it because big number funny, but it won't look any bigger. I want to place the Lord Vessel through the 4 kings. I don't know why, there's no actual benefit, I just wanted to, so it's time for Scythe. Scythe is pretty susceptible to bleed, but we also do so much damage, and she jumps away enough that I wasn't able to get a bleed proc. I have no idea why she jumped around so much this time, but it was still a really easy, fast fight because of the damage. I'm going to take out the butterfly now before I forget. ADHD makes me very prone to forgetting random details like the butterfly and the doll. It goes down in 3 hits, so it's about half a footnote. I also finally killed Havel and replaced the Fab Ring, but Havel's will be pretty pointless soon too. Since I'm here anyway, I took out the Taurus Demon in 2 hits, not even using a plunging attack because I figured it would be kinda pointless. I also buy Smo's Gauntlets from Domhnall and they make me mid-roll even with Havel's Ring, so I don't wear them yet. I also decided to get the Gargoyle home. This tangent ended up being longer than I expected, and I probably should have done this sooner, but it's fine. Since I was already collecting gear, I decided to kill Logan to get his robe, but you can't actually get it until after he hollows. Once he does, a chest appears at his final location containing his gear. Our bleed resistance is plenty high anyway though, so I'm not too concerned. I'll come back in New Game Plus to get the actual highest bleed resistance. Since I'm already on a side quest, I might as well take out some more optional bosses before I forget. First though, I'm maxing out my endurance with soul duping because more bleed resistance and big number funny. Gwendolyn dies in 4 hits over 2 cycles. I probably could have done 1 cycle if I had used better attacks, but it's fine. It's just Gwendolyn. Anyway, time for the point of this entire paragraph. The 4 kings. With this much dexterity, it's easy to take out Ingward with arrows to spare. I'm glad I got my endurance up before this so I could replace Havel's with the Covenant and not worry about sacrificing bleed resistance. It's easy enough to wail on the 4 kings without thinking, just like every other playthrough, though I did use some red moss between the 3rd and 4th kings, just in case. It honestly probably wasn't necessary, but I did just want to be safe and not die to the 2nd easiest lord. With Ceaseless Dead, we can sprint straight to the Fire Sage. The Centipede Worm couldn't attack me with how long the Scythe is, so that's not an issue. The Fire Sage is very weak to bleed, bleeding in only 2 hits, on top of the very high base damage of the Scythe, being at 40 dexterity, so it goes down very, very quickly. The Centipede Demon isn't quite as susceptible to bleed, but the base damage is still very high, and the Centipede Demon isn't a particularly difficult fight, so there's not too much worth mentioning here. Just dodge the arm throws, smack it a couple times, and don't get hit too much. Easy peasy. The Bed of Chaos is just as easy as always. Unfortunately, the overpowered Scythe doesn't make it any easier. I did die to it because I wasn't paying as much attention as I should have been, but I got it on the next attempt, so it's okay. Before going to the archives, I want to take out the Hydra so I don't have to do any backtracking. Each head comes off in a single swing, and it dies in only 4 hits, so this is a very easy Hydra fight. As usual with good weapons, the golems die super quick, the boars don't offer a challenge with a weapon that doesn't bounce off of them, and I was able to avoid being cursed by dying to the crystal bursts instead of the beams. The manserpents and Pusakas all die to a single hit, so the prison is a non-issue, as it should be. I've upgraded my health in this run, so the archives themselves are easy despite the channelers, and the crystal caves are as much a glorified hallway as usual when you're not getting any items in them. As I'm writing this, I took a short break at this point, and genuinely almost forgot to write anything about Scythe before I came back. I mean, it's Scythe, that's kinda to be expected, but I was gone for less than a minute and forgot about the main boss of the area as I was steeped in it because I'm writing about it. I just find that really funny and telling about Scythe specifically. Anyway, the single clan that got in dies in 2 hits. Scythe dies slightly slower, but it's a much easier fight, and we can move on to Nido. Unfortunately, there are a couple levels leading up to Nido, so it isn't just straight to him yet. The catacombs are easy to drop through, even easier than usual since the skeletons pose no threat when they can't bleed you. They do so little bleed build-up that the meter doesn't even appear on the screen anymore. Pinwheel dies to 2 hits, but a clone of theirs gets a vengeance hit on me. Sprinting through the Tomb of the Giants is even easier when you remember a light source, though the giant skeleton dog attacking you at the second bonfire is never less annoying. Nido gets taken out on the first try, as much as the skeletons try to make me bleed more than I already do to myself. The high damage and the long reach makes the fight far easier than normal. The skeletons can't reach me before I can reach them, and Nido can never hit you anyway, unless he uses a weird grab hitbox, but then you can just press some buttons and not actually be damaged by it. The Wolfring would have made this fight even easier, but I never went and grabbed it, so I didn't have it for this fight. I realized I forgot to fight the Stray earlier, so I go ahead and do that now. Honestly, the same stuff as the Fire Sage applies here. We have high damage, it's super susceptible to bleed, and this fight is super easy. To finish off the roster of optional bosses, we gotta go take out Capra and Gaping Dragon. Capra is only hard if you can't tank the dogs, but even if they had hit me this time, they wouldn't do nearly as much bleed as I did to myself, which is kinda funny. One of the dogs got stuck behind one of the pillars too, which made the fight even easier, since Capra died in only a few hits. We already went through the depths way earlier, so we can kill the giant rat in a single hit and move on straight to the dragon. I played a bit on the safe side, probably unnecessarily, only getting 1 hit the first time, but I was able to easily finish it off after the first charge. I did have to smack the leg due to my lack of hubris, which is admittedly uncommon, but it was still incredibly easy. This video having been recorded before any actually difficult runs I did will become blatantly obvious in the DLC. Not with the Sanctuary Guardian, it has barely any health, and most of its melee attacks leave it wide open for a strong attack. If it uses a tail swipe and tries to poison you, it's all the better. The headbutt, wave, combo, dive, and jump, on top of the tail swipe and spin, all leave it sitting there for long enough to get in a good attack. The Sanctuary Guardian is honestly one of my favorite bosses in the game. It just feels good to dodge and weave through its attacks, barely dodging the combo, only to get in a devastating attack of your own just before it jumps away. It's so much fun. I say Calamy is my favorite boss in the series, but honestly, the Sanctuary Guardian rivals it. Not the double fight though, I'm not doing that. Artorias, on the other hand, becomes rote far quicker, which is strange because the Sanctuary Guardian is squishier and has fewer attacks. I think the fact that it jumps away just as often while being able to get in and attack consistently, and it weaving in the super fast lightning attacks, makes it a more interesting and fun boss for me personally. And the tail cut is super cool. Tail cuts are just cool in this game. Anyway, we do a lot of damage to Artorias, but the distance that he ends up after using a lot of his attacks is very inconsistent, such as his forward lunge or huge jump. I was a victim of hubris a couple times during this fight, but with the damage this weapon outputs, it's genuinely a non-issue. I could chunk his health even when he got the defense boost from trying to buff. Sprinting through Ulasil is as easy as ever, assuming you know which bloatheads are important to take out, and the Mimic, big surprise, offers no challenge whatsoever. It dies in 3 hits before it can even stand up. I decided to switch up the order I did things a bit this time and take out Calamy before trying to get past the prisoner. I had no reason to, I just wanted to do it differently. Calamy is incredibly tanky, but this Scythe still does really good damage. That genuinely surprised me. Usually the damage fall off with Calamy is pretty significant, but here it's like there is barely a fall off at all. Not that I'm complaining, of course. Calamite honestly also becomes a little rote, like Artorias, but it still just feels awesome to kill a dragon. Not that I don't want bosses to have the potential to be rote, I think that's why I like Dark Souls so much. I can learn the bosses and be good at them via knowledge alone. I don't need to have good reaction time or skill or whatever. I wonder if I like Calamite so much simply because it takes more learning than Artorias. That makes me wonder then, why don't I like Manus as much? Before I get ahead of myself, I'm able to easily take out Calamite first try despite my sloppy playing, and we can move on to the final boss of the run, Manus. I have a much bigger appreciation for Manus now, after the Asylum items only run. I've beaten him under extremely unfavorable circumstances without the pendant. I can consistently dodge all 3 magic attacks without much issue, and the combo doesn't present a challenge to dodge unless I'm already being greedy. So why don't I like Manus as much as so many other people? I'm genuinely not sure. He's learnable, but learning him was much harder than any other boss in the game, and not for good reasons. His timings are weirdly delayed sometimes, though that's not unlike some other bosses, like Nito. His dark magic attacks all have very similar tells, which is a big struggle at first. His combo will hit you if you're attacking from neutral, which was annoying to learn. If you fail to dodge something like the shotgun or ring, you're almost definitely going to die unless you have relatively high health. I think it's just the fact that he's unforgiving to learn in the first place that really places a blemish on my enjoyment with him, but it's not because it was hard either. I learned to parry Gwyn in my first playthrough, and I spent at least a dozen attempts on that, running through the entire kiln every single time. I just don't think Manus was fun to learn. Now that I know him, looking back at this footage is a little painful, but I still understand why it took so long to learn him in the first place, and why it took a run like Asylum only to really push me to that. Oh, right, this is about the Scythe. It does really good damage. Even the DLC couldn't stop this beast. At least, not in the first new game cycle. We can wake up Dusk and move on to the ceremonial final boss of the run. I replaced the Gargoyle Tail Axe with the Blood Shield so I could actually parry, and because the axe provides so much more resistance than the shield, it maxed out my resistance bar without actually proccing it, which was pretty interesting. Either way, I learned to parry with the Grass Crest Shield, so medium shields are my forte here, as easy as barehanded parrying is at this point. So Gwyn is no harder than any casual run, if not easier considering the damage, especially with the Hornet Ring. So I recorded this run like a month ago and just forgot to ever make a video on it. I don't know why I was so reluctant to actually write anything for it, but anyway. I'd like to thank Nikki P. Jones, Falcon, Tori Kasuda, SDSDSDSSDSDXDD, Manarok V, Emily, and Ryan Rickard for continuing to support the channel. Thank you everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I love you all, and I don't know how to end this.